So let me tell you about my granddaughter. She's... Oh, no, that's not why I'm here, is it? But I could talk for about 3 days about it, if that's okay. Good afternoon. The end of the first day. Have you had a nice day? Yes. Isn't it been fantastic? It's a really lovely conference. Thank you so much, IATEFL committee. It's absolutely beautiful. Right, let's get on with it straight away. Years ago, I used to write course books, and then I didn't. And then very recently, I did. So what this talk is about, I'm not going to try and sell you a course book or anything. What this talk is about is what it felt like coming back in, it must have been 2014, to something that I did before in a world that is dramatically different, I think, from what it was like when I did it before. I wanted to show you a manuscript page from a course book of mine, which was used in Chile in about 1923. And so here's a manuscript page from one of my course books. Here it is. I don't know how clearly you can see it, but you'll notice that it's all in handwriting. That was a thing where you held something in your hand and you did, It's all in handwriting, my handwriting. I drew the pictures to give the editors an idea of what was going on. And you can't actually see because the definition of the screen isn't very good. But if you could, you would see that various bits of paper were stuck over other bits of paper with glue and the sellotape and everything. Because if I made a mistake, the easiest thing was to write it on a new strip of paper and stick it over what I'd written before. And one or two of you who are about 103 will remember what that was like. But looking at it now, this is a historical artifact. It's extraordinary. And I look at it, there was a wonderful English writer called Dennis Potter, who you almost certainly won't have heard of. But he was a fantastic playwright. And at the very end of his life, he did a wonderful interview. And the interviewer said to him, "You wrote your first play when you were at university, didn't you?" And he said, "Yes." And so the interviewer said, "Now when you think about it, how do you feel about it?" And he said, "I view it with tender contempt." It's the most perfect description I've ever heard. Contempt because, you look at it, you think, I'd never write that now. But tender because, you know what? It's what I did then. So I view this with a certain amount of tender contempt. But let me just show you what it's about. John Strange is in hospital. John's story, Unit 17. He's telling the police about how some men put him in a car and they threw him over a cliff. Coincidentally, this is the kind of course material that would make Scott Thornbury glad. Because it's all about teaching the past tense. That's what it's about. That's what it's about, you see. So it's about the past tense. And so what you have to do here is you read the story or you listen to it, and in the published version, of course, it was beautiful pictures and stuff. You read the story, and then you have to put the following verbs in the order they occur in the story: threw, pushed, stopped, drove, put, got out. And so you do that, and then we do a little bit of work on the past simple. And then I have to say, in my defense, that this is very radical stuff because then later on, we got a few little pictures here, and instead of just teaching you the verbs, you get the whole sort of little phrase. You've got listen to the radio, bought a television. I can't even read my writing. And they had to match those with pictures. And then, of course, you then say, now, what about you? What did you do yesterday? Did you go to the shops? Did you buy a television? And so on. You recognize this kind of thing, yeah? It's very, very typical of its time. I suppose you'd call it pretty standard presentation, practice, and production, really. And so when I started working again as a coursebook writer, I wondered if this still had any relevance. Or perhaps better, what challenges are there in 2014, 15, 16 to this kind of view of doing things? RIP, the communicative approach. And it seems to me that the challenges fit into about 3 areas. And the first of them is an area which is beautifully exemplified by an article in this magazine, Modern English Teacher. Have you read it? It's a fabulous magazine, lots of really good articles, very, very approachable, I think you could say. Good fun. And this was an article, as you can see, in April 2014 by a guy called Laurie Henderson. And it's called Breaking Up is Hard to Do. And in it, he discusses the whole issue of course books and publishers. And this is what he says. He says, well, you can read it. You may recognize here a word which Scott found it quite difficult to get out without granular was the word he used. So what this is suggesting is that the old idea of a course book with a grammar syllabus it doesn't make any sense because it's a book, and you have to wait for hours before you go from this grammar to that grammar to that grammar. But what we can do in modern day times is we can separate language down into even smaller chunks, McNuggetitos, if you like, and you can separate them down into even smaller chunks and have them on a computer, and then, depending on what the student wants, click, 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 and you go from chunquito to chunquito, like that, and doesn't sound quite right, does it? Anyway, but you get the idea. You can go from little chunk to little chunk, and that's how you learn language. And from this, we got things like, Scott mentioned Newton and Duolingo. Have you come across Duolingo? Well, these packages depend exclusively on the idea that you can have little chunks of language atomized into little chunks. I'm using the same language Scott used on purpose. Language atomized into little chunks. And then you, sitting in front of the computer, are fed the chunks when you need them. And the argument, the digital argument goes, of course, that the computer actually is rather better for you than a teacher would be. Well, yes, because a teacher has to decide what to teach you next. But teachers are fallible and human, and you're often in a class. Whereas a machine can do it if it's just you, a machine can do it for just you, personalized just for you. And the machine can measure in a second how long it takes you to go from this one to this one, how many mistakes you make. It'll take you back, go forward. Some of them can actually measure the pressure on the keypad, so it knows how you're feeling, and everything like that. And the result of that is that it can tailor a language course just for you, in a way that a teacher never can. So the digital world is is encroaching in our lives. Let's go a bit further than that. One of the things that teachers have always done is mark tests. It's not one of our favorite occupations. Would you like that job to be taken away from you? Then be very happy. It has been. Because for public tests, like the TOEFL, like the Pearson Test of Academic English, they are no longer marked by human beings. They're marked by the machine. A machine marks those public tests. There are no humans marking that public test. So any of you who used to have a job on the side marking Cambridge tests, or Cambridge isn't quite there yet, but marking public tests, if that was a sideline you had as a job, it's gone. We don't need you anymore. Computers are doing it. Now, if we go back to Duolingo and the granular little atomized chunks, the person you need to read is a guy called Philip Kerr. He writes a blog called Adaptive Learning in ELT, all one word. Adaptive Learning in ELT. Adaptive Learning in ELT. Philip Kerr, K-E-R-R. And all you have to do is Google him, you'll find it. Interestingly enough, I read a blog, his latest posting the day before yesterday, says that the industry research suggests that the fear we had that these self-study programs were going to remove our role as teachers probably are unfounded. The growth has not been what they expected. Hooray. But the reason for mentioning all this and mentioning the exams is the digital world changes everything. And it's not just the possibility that the digital world has changed is going to change the role of the teacher, even remove the teacher in more apocalyptic visions. But of course, it's the world that the students live in. And well, so do we. I mean, because everyone in this, well, not everyone in this room, but I imagine most people in this room use WhatsApp or Facebook or the equivalent, and we message people and we make little videos and we upload videos to YouTube. That's what we do. That's our lives. And if you want a taxi, you get an Uber taxi. And if you want to, well, and then they have demonstrations, and then it's all very uncomfortable. Or if you want to find out which restaurant you're going to in Santiago, you Google it. That's what we do. We all do that. So the first challenge for a coursebook writer, a materials writer, if you want, in 2016, is how does that impact on what we do? Indeed, is there any point in a coursebook in that environment? And I just went to a lovely session watching, I don't know if you're here, but a lovely session watching kids contacting other kids around the world to find out how people do, what people cook in different countries and things like that. In an environment where the kids in your school can talk to kids in an Indian school or a British school, what coursebooks? Do you need them, really? But then the second challenge is specifically to do, coming back to Scott Thornbury. Well, it's not Scott Thornbury, it's a whole tradition of talking about education. But let's focus on Scott and his pal Luke Meddings. And a wonderful, slim book, which is, because what you heard Scott articulating this morning, and many of you will know this, is something that started about 12 or 13 years ago when he wrote a very, very tongue-in-cheek, amusing article in our little IATEFL magazine. It's not a journal, a little magazine. It was this page, it was one page. Did you read it, any of you? It was the one where he said, there are these filmmakers in Scandinavia, and they're making films without any special effects, any special lighting, any music, anything like this, because they're taking a vow of chastity. No sex. And by no sex, it meant none of the special stuff that you get in Star Wars and Titanic and all the, the made-up stuff. What we should do is we should return to a kind of pre-lapsarian Garden of Eden and do everything purely. So wouldn't it be great if we could teach English without technology, without any of these, without materials, just a teacher and a student, or a teacher and a group of students in the room creating the language in front of their eyes without having to dress it up and bring things in from the outside? Why isn't it that, because people do learn language, have always learned languages like that. And the basic premise also is that if you can't teach with just a stick in the desert, you can't really teach at all. A good teacher can create education out of being in the same room as other people. And that's all you need. And people got so excited by what Scott had to say, genuinely excited, that the unplugged group that he put a quote up on was inundated with thousands of people getting really excited and saying, wow, yes, 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 let's be pure. And the result of that is that he and Luke Meddings, in the end, felt the need to publish this book to sort of explain really what they meant. And they came up with the idea of dogme teaching, which is how it started, became teaching unplugged. And it's based on 3 essential principles. And the first is that good lessons are materials light. They don't say, and if Scott was here, we've had lots of public discussions about this, so I'm not saying anything he knows what I've said about this, and we've discussed it and enjoyed discussing it. But one of the first of 3 principles is that teaching doesn't have to be materials heavy. You don't need to hit students over the head with course books. Lots and lots of material, lots of material. Actually, all you need is love. No, sorry, all you need, well, you do need that as well. All you need is me and you. That's all you need. And if we're in the room together, why do I have to bring in lots of other material? Why can't I just work with you? Because and the second thing, by the way, which refers straight back to what he was saying this morning, is that just because it's Tuesday doesn't mean it's the correct time for the present perfect. Why do we say, it's Tuesday, it's Unit 3, therefore I'm going to teach you the present perfect? That's not how it works, according to this view of the world. How it works is language emerges when it's good and ready. And if the present perfect isn't ready, it won't emerge. I can hit you over the head with the present perfect, but if the present perfect doesn't want to work, and if you aren't ready for the present perfect, not much is going to happen. Whereas, if we are having a conversation, and in that conversation, you need to do something that is best expressed by the present perfect will emerge because it wants to, because it's good and ready to emerge, and you're good and ready to receive it. So the best kind of, and this is all the sort of stuff that Diane Larson Freeman and people like that talk about, the idea of emergent language. That when people learn language that they are learning or need to learn emerges when they need to learn it. That's the second principle. And the third principle is that the real key to language learning is dialogic interaction. That when people dialogue with each other, talk to and with each other, that's when language learning really happens. So essentially, if I want to teach you language, this little group here, you and me, we talk together. And you try and express what you want to express. I help you to express what you want to express. I explain it, and that's how the language works. And by dialogic, it's of course the dialogue between the students and the students, but crucially, the teacher is part of that dialogue as well. So that's, to me, the second big discussion we've had since those wonderful old pages of my course book were published. Although it's always been around, this discussion. But the second big challenge is, at a time when people talk more and more about the fact that language is learned through a dialogic interaction with people, and it emerges in that situations, and it doesn't need all the stuff. How can a course book deal with that situation? If you believe any of this, and I believe quite a lot of it, there isn't time to discuss that in detail. I'm going to have reservations about this. I don't think it's quite as clear-cut as that. And of course, we are all here, most of us in this room, represent teaching which takes place in classrooms over a long period of time in situations that, to be frank, aren't that ideal for learning a language. And so that, there's all sorts of reservations there. But if you're at all tempted by this, then that represents a challenge for you if you wanted to write a course book. And a quote that has stayed with me ever since May was I was on a panel in Vitoria in northern Spain, and one of my co-panelists, who's a passionate devotee of content-based instruction, he said, if you want your students to learn English, don't teach the language. Actually, the worst thing you can do is teach the language. What you should do is have content which is so interesting that it drags the language with it. That instead of saying, my whole purpose in life is to teach you the present perfect, what I'm going to do is we're going to talk about real things which interest you so much, where the content is so important that it drags the language through. And if you want to say the language emerges, that's fine. But the whole point of it is that, maybe, this is a big maybe, but it's something you have to think about. Maybe most of what Scott was saying is right. No, I didn't mean it like that. No. But seriously, maybe our focus on teaching language in the way we're teaching it, we've got it all chueco, upside down, That actually maybe, well, you get the point. So there's a challenge. So those are two or three challenges which really kind of perplexed me when I was thinking of becoming a coursebook writer again, or at least a contributor to a coursebook. And the question is how forget coursebooks for a minute. How would a good contemporary teacher respond to the kind of discussions we've been having terribly quickly. I do apologize for the speed at which I've done this, but there's stuff to do. So I think after Scott's plenary this morning and after what I've said, you understand the territory, right? That we're in, and the sort of the slight quagmire that we're in, and the doubt. And by the way, the doubt on the other side too, because whatever you say about the grammar syllabus, it does have some advantages, and everyone in this room, that's a lie. I cannot possibly say that. I suspect that the majority of people in this room who are second language users of English went through a fairly grammar-based syllabus, and it doesn't seem to have destroyed your English. There's a whole other discussion there as well, but we won't go into that now. Oh, okay, so how might good teachers respond to these kind of dilemmas? Well, we're just going to do some stuff now and see how you feel, and then I'll try and draw some conclusions. So very, very, very quickly, I'd like you to turn to the person next to you, and the question is, how important is music in your life? Just talk to the person next to you, what? And you have to, you're not allowed to sit there, you know. You know each other, right?
No.
What's that? Introduce each other. I'm sorry you're sitting on your own. Do you want to listen? Will you talk to her? Because she's looking lonely. What time am I supposed to finish?
7:30.
What's the time now?
It's about 5 to 7.
Oh, perfect. Okay, thank you. By the way, I'm asking you this question because everybody in this room has some relationship to music, even if you're not very keen, even if you kind of hate hearing music in the shopping mall and stuff like that. But everyone has some kind of relationship to music. So did you hear anything interesting? Did you hear anything interesting when you were talking to people? Did your partner give you any interesting facts that surprised you? What?
No, she says she was surprised by my answer.
And what was your answer?
Well, music to me is like my second passion after teaching, because my father used to be a musician, so I was raised with music. I know how to play the guitar. I took singing classes. So I think so.
It's really, really important to you. It's part of your life. Anybody else in this room, it's kind of part of your life, real passion for you? Put your hands up. Oh, so there's quite a few people who's really, really. Are you a musician? What do you play?
Play guitar, some keyboards,
And you really care about it, right?
Yes, I do.
Making music's the thing. And for other people in this room, of course, you don't necessarily play a musical instrument. We'll come to that later. But you like listening to music?
Yes.
How many people in this room would say that music was extremely important for them? Okay. What about quite important? Not very important. Yeah. So there's a range of. Everyone in this room has that kind of relationship to music. Okay. But I've got a task for you here. Because you might have gathered that we're going to be talking for the rest of this session about music. But don't panic if you're not very keen on music. It's not going to be music, I love music, I love music, I love music. I promise you. Anyway, okay, so I've got a task for you. Here is a list of instruments. I don't want you to speak for a second except to say yes or no. Do you know what all these instruments are? Do you all have reception on your cell phones? Okay. If there are any instruments that you don't know what they are, will you please Google them now and find out what they are? But don't speak, just find out what they are. Just Google. Okay, now listen. When I asked you how important music was in your life, I wanted to say something which is probably very obvious to you, but is, for me, of absolutely vital importance, which is this. Students walk into the classroom, they bring their mochilas, they bring their books, they've got phones, they've got everything else like that. But the most important thing a student brings into the classroom is themselves. And we have to get themselves into the lesson before we do anything else. So it sounds like a terribly obvious thing to say, but you know, you first, the first thing you say is, how important is music to you? And in a real class, we'd have a bit of a discussion, because I'm bringing you into the room. I want you here. All teachers do this. I want my students present and with me and with the topic. But the whole point is, that's not going to happen necessarily if I stand up and say, right, I'm going to talk to you about music. No, the thing we have to do is bring students in to the topic and say, how important is music to you? Now, the second thing which matters to me is I can tell you which each of these instruments are. I can put pictures up on the board with these instruments. I can play you little clips of these instruments. But isn't it much more interesting to go and look for the one? And my problem about doing that is I don't know which of these instruments you don't know. So rather than tell you what they all are, or say, why don't I just say what I just said? Because we live in 2016. All you have to do is get your stupid phones out and look at it. And now we know. And now what I want you to do, very quickly, just to test that you are indeed fully cognizant of all the various musical instruments here, is to choose one of these musical instruments, but do not tell anybody else. So have you done that? Okay, now I want you to turn to someone next to you, behind you, in front of you, and I want you to mime playing one of these instruments, and they have to guess which one it is. Okay, off you go, off you go. Beautiful.
My favorite.
So what's he doing? What's he doing? I have to say, I don't know quite how to say this because I don't want to be rude, but I don't think I'm going to have you in my orchestra. I mean, quite a lot of people. But here we are. So I've got this thing. I want to try and get you to have some instruments in your head for all sorts of reasons of what's coming next, et cetera, et cetera. And we live in an age where you don't have to tell. You can get people to Google. You can get people to play, enjoy, and have fun with it. And then I can simply say to you, okay, do you know who any of these people are? Anybody know any of these people? Put up your hand if you know anybody. Yes? Hilary Hahn. Absolutely right. Anybody else? What? Vanessa May. No, it isn't. Okay, I'll tell you who they are and see if this helps. Here they are. Yuja Wang, Courtney Pine, Hilary Hahn, Tomani Diabate, Rodrigo y Gabriela, and Anushka Shankar. So my task, this is the boring bit in a way. This is the boring bit in a way. The task is quite simple. Can you guess, my dear students, and you can guess in pairs and things like that, where they're from and what instruments you think they might play? So, have a guess. Thank you. Remember my question. My question was, what would an ordinary contemporary, a good contemporary teacher do? And I can't see that they wouldn't do anything different from this, which is I'm going to tell you about some people. Let's have a guess. And with any luck, you will be mildly interested to know in a minute if you manage to guess anything. What does Hilary Hahn play? Violin. She's a violin. What kind of violin? Do you know where she's from? No, I don't. Okay, I'm going to play you an audio. I'm not, because we don't have time. But I'd play you an audio with the information that I asked you to guess. And it turns out that Hilary Hahn is an American classical violinist. Her recording of the solo Bach partitas when she was 15 years old is absolutely spectacularly beautiful. Tiamane Dubate plays the kora, which you all know what it is now, right? Yeah, because you've Googled it. If I'd said to you, you've Googled it, and it's an amazing instrument. Courtney Pine, any idea where he comes from? He's an Englishman, a British, well, yes, he is English of probably West Indian descent or something like that. And he's an amazing, amazing jazz saxophonist. But I've got a CD he made, the silver round things, like anyway. I got a CD he made where he does a whole jazz album on the bass clarinet. It's absolutely extraordinary. Okay, Rodrigo and Gabriela. They play the guitar, and they're from Mexico lindo y querido. Oh, they're from Mexico. There's a couple of Chilangos from Ciudad de Mexico, and they were in a rock band, and they got fed up with that. This is quite a good story for us, actually. And then they buggered off to Ireland with a couple of guitars and with 0 words in English. And they sat on the streets of Dublin and busked for money with their guitar cases open, and in the process developed their own style. And they just stand there playing 2 guitars to hundreds of thousands of people. Anushka Shankar plays the sitar because her father was Ravi Shankar, the most famous sitar player. She's absolutely, not only is she unbelievably beautiful, but she's also an incredible sitar player, and she's just about perfect as far as I can see. And top left, Yuja Wang plays the piano. She is one of the best classical piano players in the world. And she confuses old men critics. Because she's about 28 years old, and the other day in London, she performed in London the Messiaen's Tirangolila Symphony with Gustavo Dudamel, and she walked onto the stage with the biggest tacones you have ever seen. I mean, she could hardly get it, and all the old men critics were going, "Oh, this is disgraceful. She won't be able to play the piano." and then she sat down. Now, what am I going to do with you, my dear students? I've told you about these people. Are you interested? Yes, yeah, but not that interested. All right, so who's got their headphones with them? I'm not going to do this for you. And hopefully, I tell you what, I don't even care about headphones. Choose some of these people, any one of these, and go to YouTube and listen to them. And then tell me what you think. Because now we're talking about something, and there's a chance you'll be interested. Just go and find them and see what you think. Choose one and see what you think. Now, what I would say to you, quite seriously, is you've seen them, I've described them. Could you please make a note of the one that you want to listen to? Just see. And then when you get home, some people have already. When you go home, just go to YouTube and listen. You may think their music's rubbish. But you know what? This is real world stuff. Yeah, go on. Let's see. Go on. Don't stop. Don't stop.
I'll put it in your microphone.
Yeah, go on.
But wait. I see.
Please show your love right now.
Where's the speaker? Where? You can't really see it because it's a bit small, but oh, come on, hurry up, start. Yes, this is not fair. They're not starting. Right. I think they're going to start.
No, they're going to start.
Oh, shut up, they're talking. Okay. But you get the point. Seriously, I'm quite serious about this. You remember the guy who said, if you want students to learn English, don't teach language? Now, What do you think? Sounds. Anyway, go have a look at. You get the point. You get the point. We live in 2016. There is no point in saying, "Ooh, there are these musicians. Aren't they interesting?" The whole point is, for the first time ever in the history of English language teaching, the students can see whether they're interesting or not. They can decide. Maybe they think they're the most boring musicians in the world. It doesn't matter. It's real. It's real. It matters. Oh, I'd forgotten. I've got it here already. I've completely messed this up. Anyway, so just because we're here, and I'll give you a little snatch of Yu Jiaowang as well. See what you think of her. Do you like this? She's beautiful. Oh, she's beautiful. I'm just going to leave it running for 2 seconds more, because I'm in love with her fingers. Which completely ruins the whole point of what I was going to say, what I was trying to say, because I've shown it to you. And actually, no, the most fun was a few people in this room who actually found one of the musicians. They were looking at them and looking really interested. How wonderful! My students are interested. And remember, people learn English when we don't teach them language. If I've got you hooked on the content, I've got you. Okay, and while we're on the subject, would you like to all stand up, please? And you can see these questions around on here. It says, find people who could play a musical instrument, when they started, when and where they play and practice. And if you don't play a musical instrument, what musical instrument would you like to play? So just talk in little groups of 3 or 4. Just turn around and talk to each other. Thank you very much. Thank you very much. That thank you. That's the best part of the talk. That was the best part of the talk. Nothing will be as good as that for the next 20 minutes. Why? Because everyone was really animated. Everyone had something to say. You were standing up, so some blood was circulating around your bodies, not just sitting down as you've been doing most of the day. And we were talking to each other. And of course, you know, the whole idea that dialogic interaction is one of the ways language learning happens is the idea of will students speak Spanish? Some of them will, some of them won't, or they'll speak a bit of Spanish. I don't even care. The point is to get people talking to each other. When we get people talking to each other, they try and make the connections of the language they have. They're retrieving language they know. They're trying to use it. When they do that, the processing that's going on in the brain is about as important as anything that could possibly happen. So these moments when you get everybody up to talk to each other are not little careless, what should we do now moments. They're really important. Okay, here's a picture. What do you think of that? Well, where is he? Where is he? It's a rubbish tip. What's that? And this? And this? Okay, so my students, I'm going to ask them, and I'm going to let them guess as much as they want what this is all about, because they're about to read a reading text. But with any luck, this, to me, I find this interesting. Something interesting is going on. So rather than ask you to read the reading text, because this is a presentation after all, I'll tell you a little story. And it's a story about a place called Cateura in Paraguay. And you see, you've heard about these guys. Cateura in Paraguay. I've never been there, and if I'm honest, I don't particularly want to. Because from what I understand, it is one big garbage dump. All of Paraguay sends its garbage to Cateura. And if you look at the videos, you see the water running in the street is just not nice. And there's hardly any corriente most of the time, and there's poverty everywhere, and people live off rubbish, and it's just like your kind of worst nightmare. Anyway, there was a man called Luis Saran in another part of Paraguay, and he, like many musicians, has this dream of telling all young children how good music is. So he takes an orchestra around Paraguay and does performances and the whole idea is to enthuse children. And they play kind of Mozart and stuff and little string. And one day they went to Cateura, and there must be somewhere they played and things like that. And the kids of Cateura were absolutely entranced and very excited, and they wanted to play too. But they had a problem. No instruments and not even ni un centavito to buy an instrument. They just, they had nothing. So that was that. Until one of Luis Saran's friends went to visit someone he knew called Cola, who's this guy there, actually. And he has a little hut in the middle of the rubbish dump where he reclaims things. And he makes things. And so this guy took him a violin and said, could you make one of these out of rubbish? No, he said, could you make a violin out of rubbish? To which Cola said, what's a violin? So he took him a violin. So the guy measured the violin, and he looked at anything, and he built a violin out of an old baking tray and bits of metal, and he used handles of old hairbrushes for the tuning pegs and things like that, and he made a tin violin. And when you played it, it's not as good as a Stradivarius, but a Stradivarius costs about $35 million, and this cost nada. So he made a violin. And then he made a cello, and then they made cellos out of old oil drums, and then he made flutes out of old plumbing, and then he used little moneditas for what do you call them, the keys, and sooner or later they had an orchestra, the Orquestra de Instrumentos Reciclados de Cateura, Paraguay, and they started playing. It was sort of okay, And they played so well that they went off and played in the Concertgebouw in Amsterdam. Yes, a bit of a novelty act, admittedly. It's not like a really good orchestra. But what they said is, You send us garbage and we transform it into music. It's the most beautiful message you can have. And then, and you may have seen them, they went off on a Latin American tour with Metallica. And if you go to YouTube, you will see a picture of them playing in el estadio más grande de Chile. No sé cuál es. And there they are, standing on the stage in front of thousands of people, these little 15, 16-year-olds playing away on their, fantastic story. So, what do? Well, you have a text about it. And I'm not asking you to read it. I've specifically made it very faint, because if you read it, then you won't listen to me, and I'm the important one, okay? Okay, so what do you do with a text like that? Well, you tell the story, and you ask questions. You make sure all the students understand the questions. I think this is what a teacher does. And oh, yes, wait a minute. Oh, shut it, Jeremy, you stupid person. Where we are. And by the way, this is the last paragraph of the text. Oh, no, it isn't. I'm going to kill you. There is the last paragraph. Just read that paragraph. Just turn to the person next to you. How do you feel about those last two questions? What do you think? And you know, the point I'm trying to make is, just because you're intermediate students, and just because your ability to be articulate is intermediate level, my dear students, doesn't mean your brains are dead. And I think this is a really interesting question. Now, it may interest you or it may not, but if you sit in a little group and try and talk about it, and we say a few things about it, guess what? I don't want to go back to Scott and his family in New York or whatever it was, but you know what? This is about 1 gazillion times more interesting and important than some imaginary family on a holiday in New York, as far as I can see. Oh, and by the way, the thing about what you do in the modern world as teachers is, of course, we can have fun and have silly dialogues and make jokes and tell stories that aren't true. But what we do is we have a big flag saying, this is a silly joke, this is a dialogue, this isn't true. But if you try and tell students stories that are true, you know what? They'd better be true. Because I want to encourage you to explore online and find Rodrigo y Gabriela. I want to encourage you to go and Google everything we're talking about. And if you're remotely interested about this, you'll Google them. And if it's not true, you'll kill me. Or at least you will lose considerable interest in me as the kind of teacher you want. But it is true. It's a real story. And if you Google it, you'll find them. And if, by the way, you're Googling them now and not listening to me, hooray! Because you'll find it in English mostly, and at least I've got engaged students doing stuff instead of people going, when's he going to finish? Of course you do this kind of thing with a text like that. You have, guess what? Try and work out the past tenses. And, well, yeah, why not? And you get them to think about it. Or some vocabulary. There's nothing wrong with that. I'm not for 1 minute suggesting I'm probably not quite as radical as someone like Scott Thornberry, but of course it's useful to use texts for language. But that's not all we should do with them. And unless the texts are themselves, the content is interesting enough, even the language won't be interesting. But now what? Every text you go to, I know you can't see it, don't panic. Every text you go to has the past continuous and the past simple, or the present perfect, or the future, or the third conditional. But you know, almost no text in a textbook is that boring. They all have phrases in them, which just happen to be there. And you know what we do? I'm sorry it's so small. But you know, suddenly in the middle of that text, there's this thing, it says, suddenly he had a brainwave. You know, and what do good teachers do? Good teachers say, you know, that might be the kind of expression that students will kind of steal, put in their suitcases and take home with them. Suitcase language. Language which is so nice that I want it. And imagine if your students met a gringo on the street and said, I've just had a brainwave. What a thing to say. But you know, it's just as important to have a brainwave as to use the present perfect. Well, that's an arguable proposition. But the point is, if we ignore, you never have a whole course book based on he had a brainwave, and all these phrases, these phrases, because you can't systematize them in any way. But when they're there, you have to aprovechar. You have to say to students, would you like to take this away? Do you want to take it with you? Go on, take it with you. Take away language, brainwave language, and that kind of thing. What next? Oh, yes. Now, what I would do is if I had time, so I'd get you to retell the story of the recycled orchestra of Paraguay. Or maybe we'd have a press conference. I'd give you a bit of time to read it again, and then I'd have you up here, and you'll be the guy in making the violins, and you can be one of the girls, and you're one of the boys or something. You know, I'll get 5 or 6 people up here pretending to be 15-year-olds who play in it, and then I'll make 2 or 3 of you a journalist, and we'll ask questions, and we'll talk about it. And maybe the original musician, and then maybe one of you can be the president of Paraguay. Okay, no, it's a bit dodgy, that. But we'll have a press conference. And what are these for? Well, what we know about language learning and what we sometimes forget at our peril is good language learners use them. Memory is an absolutely critical element of language learning. Memory really matters, and everything we can do to train our students' memory is a really good thing to do. But not only that, stories really matter. And what do we do with stories? We tell and retell stories, especially stories. You know, you'll never guess who I met in the supermarket. And and if you have met someone amazing, you don't just tell one person, you tell about 56 people, and by the time you've finished telling them, it's really good. And you've committed everything to memory. And so what I want to do with my students is offer them really good stories, but not then say, story's over, we're going, but story's over, explore it, go online, find out more information about it. Now let's talk about it, let's remember it. Let's have a press conference, because memory really matters. This isn't something extraordinary that I've suddenly come up with, but what is that? Is that Treno? Treno is that palabra? Treno, yeah. Anyway, thunder. God is angry with me. I'm sorry. Okay, but by the way, I've nearly finished. So I'm going to sum up now. I'm going to sum up, and we're all going to get soaking wet on the way home, and I'm sorry, but it's not my fault. Okay. The point about retelling stories is that forcing students to remember forces them to go back to language that they've come across, forces them to express themselves, and retelling stories, re-explaining things, re-describing is one of the most important things we can do Oh, and one last thing I'd really like you to do, my dear students, is become a YouTuber. Seriously, become a YouTuber. Because you know, there's some Swedish guy's got about 25 million followers at the moment. He's the most popular man in the world, and teenagers all over the world go, and what does he do on YouTube? Do you know what he does? He sits in front of the camera saying, oh my God, I'm a bit tired today because I didn't get to sleep much last night, but you know, I'm hoping today's going to be better. Bye. That's the kind of thing YouTubers say on YouTube. It's really, really interesting. And they have millions of followers who are really interested in them. Well, you know what? I want my students to make little videos and, if possible, upload them to YouTube. You know why? Because there's a colleague of ours, a woman that some of us know called Vicky Samuel, she told me about this first. It's so obvious, but I hadn't realized until I heard her say it. She teaches teenage kids in Buenos Aires. And she says the moment you get the teenage kids to upload stuff or write a blog or upload stuff to the internet, you know what they do? They do it more carefully and with more kind of got to get it right, oh, I want it to be good, than they'll ever do for homework for the teacher. So what I think get students to upload stuff on YouTube, make little videos, film stuff, upload it. The moment it's uploaded, everyone can see it. And the moment everyone can see it, you want to make it good. And that really worked for me. So anyway, those are just, it's not the best lesson you've ever seen in your life sort of thing, or lessons. But I don't think there's anything to complain about in what we've done. So the real question then is how would you summarize this? Well, you summarize them completely blankly. And you make it a guessing game for everybody's. Okay. Don't worry about it. Basically, there are four elements here. The first is the whole thing about everything that happens in a classroom. Every single thing it's all about you. It's all about you, students. It's not about me at all. I want to be the best teacher in the world. I want every single student in the world to love me to pieces and talk about me. When I'm 103, I want them to say, oh, do you remember Jeremy, the best teacher I ever had? Of course I want that. I've got an ego. I'm sorry. But in the end, I really don't matter a damn. I don't matter a damn. It's all about them, number one. Number two, we know that if students use their brains with volition, if students are prepared to put some brain work into what they're doing, at whatever level we're talking about, it's going to be better for them. We know that when students produce language and try to produce language as well as they can, it's really good for them because the thought processes that are going on in their heads is part of what learning a language is all about. We also know that we live in a digital age which is completely different from 1980, whatever it was, when you saw that manuscript of mine. And so I've got little labels to remind me of what I think are part of absolutely sort of essential parts of teaching. And the first one is this idea of you first. The idea that just something to remember, that in the end it's all about them, and students bring themselves into the classroom and they come first. And I really like the idea of getting everybody up in classrooms. Not all the time, but a little bit of chaos in the classroom and people moving and standing up and not sitting all day and talking to each other, having conversations really works. And it's in those interactions and dialogues that language is really used. And of course, they provide me, the teacher, with the best evidence I could ever have of what I need to do. You're not, in brackets, I'm slightly worried about the idea of, all fluency communicative activities, we write down all the mistakes and then we go through all the mistakes on the board and, but we don't say who made the mistake because that would be wrong. Well, I'm a bit worried about that because sometimes everything's gone off the boil by that stage and the whole point of, but the fact is that if students are talking with each other with any kind of enthusiasm, or if I'm there listening, I know a lot more than I did before they started talking. How do you get students using their brains? Well, of course, getting students to think about things, whether it's thinking about whether you should send new instruments to the kids of Cateora, or whether it's thinking about why this piece of grammar works this way and not that way, or whether it's thinking about whether you like this or that, or whether it's thinking about whether you would categorize this word as this type or that type. Thinking is really good for you if you're a language learner, and it's much better than not thinking. Seriously, because sometimes some teaching, some autopilot teaching, doesn't seem to involve much thinking on anybody's part. And then you know pretty much that probably nothing will stick around after that. Of course, we get students to predict things because you've read it in books. We want them to activate their schemata and all this kind of stuff, blah, 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 blah. But predicting really works because it does. It brings the students back into the classroom. It brings the students into topics and things like that. and guessing things, because guessing forces you to guess. But think, that's the word I was after. Think. Yes, you must have seen you've all seen that wonderful SOS YouTube, haven't you? What are you thinking about? Is that? Yeah, it's the German Coast Guard. What? Is it? That's the one, yes. It's just, I don't know why it came to my mind, but it makes me laugh every time. And if you haven't seen it on YouTube, because, by the way, that's what we can do in 2016. We can say, go onto YouTube and find it, dear students. It was an advert for a language school, and it's actually a very funny joke about German pronunciation of English. It could well have been any other nationality. So if you go to YouTube and try and find the German Coast Guard, you'll find it, I think. And a really crucial part of good teaching is to get students to try and remember things, to try and commit things to memory, like telling stories, retelling what you did before. What happened then? Having role plays, press conferences about something they read about, so on and so forth. And as for speaking, of these three, the one I'd just say a little bit about is this whole issue of presenting to your classmates. And a bit like the video posting, they did an experiment recently at International House where I won't go into detail, it's got to do with Sugata Mitra, it's got to do with the whole communicative movement. But basically what they would do every afternoon is they'd say to the students, I want you to answer a question. And one of the questions, for example, is what's the best way to learn a language? Okay, you 5 in the group, you got 25 minutes. And in 25 minutes, I'll come back and you will have to present your answer to the question to the whole group. That's it. That's all they did. And what they suggest, the result of that was that students over a 2-week period, their fluency improved dramatically. We could discuss whether their overall language improved dramatically. But what made it so special is that the students were doing the searching, but crucially, the students were standing up and having to present what they had found to their classmates. And rather like the video, you do it with care when you have to do that. And the last 2 points are and I talked about suitcase language, the idea of language takeaways. You know, actually finding nice language to take away. Language you like. What are your favorite words in this text? And so on. And in 2016, you get students to explore online and make videos and things like that. And these are flags that I use. In a course book I've just done, we use these flags. But I sort of have to end with something that we have been saying about course books, most of us, for the last X hundred years. It's sort of like this. It goes like this. How should you deal with a lesson plan? It's that either a lesson plan has to be followed rigidly or a course book rigidly is kind of a bit nuts, really. And in the end, by the way, I suppose I'll have to end by saying, I really like what that guy said in Spain. I found it convincing. It tied in very much with a lot of what we heard in the first plenary this morning. If the content is compelling enough, the language will come. And if a text is worth reading and talking about and thinking about, it's also worth mining, like a gold mine, to pick out what's good at it. And if language is worth having students' attention drawn to, then it's worth thinking about as well. And I think I've managed to talk long enough for there to be no thunder or rain. So on your way home, you will find a beautiful winter evening, warm and the smell of wood smoke. Oh no, it's probably against the law, isn't it? That's Montevideo. But anyway, right, I think that's me. Thank you very much, and I'll see you tomorrow. Thank you. Thank you very much. Thank you. See you tomorrow. Thank you. Thanks for coming. Have a wonderful evening.